I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, Shane Conto, to the Real Mental podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting about the film.
Yeah, Will and Harper. It's a really interesting documentary film. I found that it was much more emotionally resonant than your
Mhm.
typical documentary. So why don't you get started and share, your thoughts and feelings about it, and then I'll jump in, add my little psychological piece.
Sounds good. It is a much more intimate, very personal kind of documentary than, a documentary focusing on trans community. It's a film that really came out of two friends deciding they're going to go on a road trip and experience that kind of journey. And, one of those friends just happens to be Will Ferrell. And after said close to 30 years of friendship, you have Will Ferrell and Harper Steele, who recently transitioned, going on this trip across, the heartland of America, going to basketball games, going to bars, and going out to restaurants. I think it's works on multiple different levels in terms of its impact because one, it is such a beautiful, intimate story about a friendship and how friendships evolve over
Yeah.
time. And, you know, obviously, this is very specifically about a transition story and a trans story, but every friendship, things change in people's lives and they evolve. And it's interesting seeing that happen on a road trip like this. Also, very specifically in terms of how it shows the complications of being a trans person in America because, they're big named Hollywood folk, and generally you would expect things are a lot easier to have that kind of transition in Los Angeles or New York City. But this really goes through the heart of to play potentially be a very uncomfortable experience, and it does get that way at times. And I feel like this film works so well because the filmmaker Josh Greenbaum just allows these two friends to guide this journey. And road trip films are fun to begin with because
Yeah.
you're seeing the sights, you're experiencing all these things and whatever kind of hijinks the quote unquote characters are getting into. And here it's just, two friends who are putting themselves, specifically Harper putting herself in a situation. Things can be really complicated. And you see how it increasingly gets more uncomfortable depending on some of the places that they go. One thing that did stick out, I know there's one sequence in the film where the idea is, well, Will Ferrell is very famous and people might be acting differently with his presence. And that's leveraged in a positive way, trying to soften that transition. And there's one sequence in the film where he goes incognito. Um, the choice of the incognito disguise probably was not the best in terms of like, hey, look, this is just a normal person. It felt very much like a Will Ferrell kind of gag. And we're a film where obviously this is a very heavy topic and a really significant issue in today's society. It still is funny, and it has to be because it has Will Ferrell and Harper Steele in it, who are funny people. And I appreciate that this film's able to balance that. I was a little afraid that they were going to go overboard with like quote unquote celebrity cameos, which feels hard to say because like they're their actual friends. We see them as celebrities, but they're their actual friends. But I feel like they tastefully incorporated them, even the fun song Kristen Wiig came up with for this whole journey. But I felt a lot. I laughed. I got emotional. It's a wonderful little journey of a film.
Yeah, I think the word intimate is very good because even though they take this wild road trip,
Mhm.
from one side of the country to the other, it's still very much focused on the two of them and their relationship.
Yeah.
And as you say, relationships all transition. When you think about becoming friends with someone, let's say in college, and
Mhm.
then, people move or they get married or they have a family or or they get like a big job. And so the relationship changes. The relationship changes with all our life transitions. And if we can sustain that relationship through the transitions, then it really gets richer and deeper. And
Mhm.
I think what it shows with Harper and Will is that their relationship is able to sustain all the different life transitions. And I wanted to focus on one thing that Harper says at the very beginning of the film, which is that she delayed her transition to age 61, which is quite late in life,
Mhm.
but she delayed it because of her fear that people wouldn't love her. And that to me was like the universal fear, right? Because what do
Yeah.
we all want? We want to be loved, right?
Mhm.
And and I think so many of us choose to do things or not to do things in order to avoid losing love, right? In
Mhm.
order to avoid having the people in our life reject us or judge us or feel uncomfortable around us. So Harper has waited to age 61 because she's terrified that people won't love her. And it looks like, from what the scenes were toward the end, is that she had to get to a point of feeling so desperate and so suicidal, really, that her life was just so awful living out of her truth as a
Mhm.
man that she finally had to risk, not feeling loved by people. And then at the very end, when they're having a pedicure with Molly Shannon, another
Yeah.
celebrity cameo, and Molly says, "Hey guys, what did you learn? What did you learn, Harper, through this, 3,000-mile road trip?" And Harper said, "I learned that Will loves me." And that was the time, I think, where everyone in the audience, broke down in tears and there were
Yeah.
sobs on either side of, us. And I think that that's all about the whole film. It's like, will you be loved if you make this big change that some people won't understand or
Mhm.
appreciate, or that will make them uncomfortable? Will you still be loved? And at the end, you saw that their friendship was able to integrate this change very seamlessly. Will was just a good friend, and Harper felt, okay, I am loved. And wow, that to me was what the film was really about.
Absolutely, and that is such a hard experience to learn too, and understanding that on some level, if you're worried about people not loving you for being who you really are, those aren't really the kind of people that you really want in your life. But for people to learn that lesson, potentially have to put yourself through so much pain. And that's completely understandable in terms of why that transition took so long for Harper to finally make that decision. And it is very heartwarming to see because, our perception of Will Ferrell from, film goers and stuff like that is he's a giant goofball, which he kinda is, it seems like in real life too, and obviously he has the fun along the way too, and they have a fun banter, and he asks questions and still brings that levity to things, and it softens it, but you can tell that's how he connects with people, and their dynamic was so fantastic in this, and there's moments where it's like you laugh because it's funny, but then also processing, thinking that these are challenging things that they're trying to process through. And at the end of the day, yeah, he really is a good friend in terms of he's open minded, he's understanding, and he tries to ask questions to learn.
Yeah.
Does he? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that the other thing is Harper is really courageous because she says, "Look, ask me anything.
Anything.
Ask me anything. There's nothing you shouldn't, talk about with me." And I thought that was incredible too,
Yeah.
because, she really opens the door for Will to, to walk in. And I think a lot of time in friendships and in relationships, romantic relationships, one of the things that creates a separation is feeling like there are things that we can't talk about, right? I
Mhm.
can't talk about this with my friend. I can't talk about this with my partner because it might upset them or it might make them uncomfortable. It might make them feel a certain way. But Harper is really saying, there's nothing that you can't talk about with
Mhm.
me. I will be okay with anything. And she really was. Like, Will asked her some very personal questions, and
Mhm.
in a documentary where everyone else is going to hear the answers.
Yes.
And she was very courageous and very open, and she answered them. And I think that she created the circumstances that made it possible for any friend to really
Mhm.
connect with her. So she did a wonderful thing there too, I think.
Yeah, and I know I could speak from my own relationship with my wife. I'm definitely the one who's much more comfortable talking about anything in this situation. And, it's important kind of process to be able to
Yeah.
talk about certain things that you might be afraid to talk about, but you grow through them. And I know one of the big things that Harper talks about is that she made this decision because, going around with Will Ferrell to all these places will help this transition and soften things a bit. But then the point that you bring up, there's also something extremely courageous about being so open and vulnerable to all of the people who are going to watch this film. And whether people got to check it out in a theater or it's on Netflix. So, like, this is a very accessible film for a
Yeah.
lot of people to just, dive deeply into your personal journey. And she's very open about it. And, it opens the door for Will Ferrell to ask some silly questions or things that are really personal and intimate, and being able to see a friendship that transcends those kind of bonds. Because I feel like all of us have different kinds of friends. There's certain friends that, like, yeah, we talk about certain things. I don't really talk about personal things with that friend, but we have similar interests. And this shows a fully well-rounded relationship where two people can be very open and honest and be themselves in front of each other.
Mhm.
And along the way, you get to see beautiful aspects of just the country and also not so beautiful aspects of the country and the people that live here in the United States. Me speaking for myself as someone from the United States, there's some seediness that you uncover throughout this film, and it's sad. And, there's a couple of scenes that are really hard to watch because you can feel the tension heighten certain sequences, and those are important because they're authentic and they're true.
And now let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. We all need to be inspired and uplifted these days. We need a good laugh and we need to be moved. In the Ruthless Compassion podcast, I speak with a wonderfully diverse group of people. They've overcome daunting obstacles and they're making unique, exciting contributions to our communities and to our world. The Ruthless Compassion podcast is at 145 episodes and counting. Why not have a listen to it today? Yeah, I found it really fascinating that Harper said to Will, "Okay, I want to go on this road trip, but I want to go to all the places I used to enjoy going to
Yep.
as a man." And as a man, Harper could walk into a dive bar and strike up a conversation and have a nice evening, or go to a community basketball game, or
Yeah.
go to a big basketball game, or go to a demolition derby,
Yeah.
or go to a big steakhouse in Texas. So she used to be able to do those things as a man and no one would look twice and she would integrate fine and have a good time. But going back as a trans woman to these places, first of all, just to go as a woman in some of these
Yeah.
places would be difficult. But to go as a trans woman, an older trans woman who can't quote unquote pass as a cis woman
Mhm.
because her transition was later and she hasn't, gone through lots and lots of surgery, like say
Mhm.
Caitlyn Jenner,
Yeah.
right? So she looks like a trans woman, and here she is in a restaurant in Texas with a bunch of good old boys. And yes, there's her friend there. And yes, there's a camera crew. But as you said, it was extremely anxiety provoking seeing the overt hostility. It's like the
Mhm.
hostility just permeated the air. And that was so brave, I think, of her to go there and just to see what it would feel like,
Mhm.
in her new way of being.
Well, in Harper's situation, she probably could have avoided any of those kinds of experiences and not had to have felt them. But this journey is about her being herself. And the whole entire point of going through this transition is for her to be able to be who she is. and sees herself.
Yeah.
But if you have to be able to stop doing the things that aren't attached to that, but those are the things that make you happy and that you've enjoyed your whole life, that also is defeating the purpose of going through that transition. So
Yeah.
being able to put herself in those uncomfortable situations. And, I work at a college, and generally you would expect a college campus to be more open-minded in experiences. And I work with students who are trans, and even in a college setting, not everybody's going to be at that place to be warm and welcoming, or who aren't going to put in the effort to understand that these are your pronouns. This is your name. And I've seen the impact of just somebody's name or their pronouns can do to a person. And I know very recently, so this is kind of a raw experience, but we had an unfortunate incident where one of our students committed suicide.
Wow.
And he was a young trans man. And he was one of my student workers. So I've got to know him over the past couple months, and watching this film, because I had watched this film before this all happened. And then the fact that you had reached out and wanting to talk about one of the films from TIFF and realizing this has a very for me now, watching this and reflecting upon it.
Yeah.
And this is an important kind of film because it shows that you're gonna wind up experiencing some of this unfortunates from people, but also that there's people out there who will love you no matter what. And I think that's the most important message out of this film, and seeing how a relationship that was one way for almost 30 can persevere and process through this as long as you have the connections with the right people who are worth it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love so much about TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, is that they are very courageous in the kinds of films they bring to the festival, and the kinds of films that they want people to see and experience. And there's so many films that are very positive about LGBTQIA plus community, and I really commend them for that. And this film, is one of the very best. I was thinking about another thing. I mean, I'm very sorry for your loss, for sure. It's very, very sad, but I want to move to a slightly different theme here, because I was thinking about Harper and her, her feelings about being a woman, and again, transitioning late and being in her 60s and wanting to be attractive. And there's, the same scene when they're going out for dinner in Las Vegas, and she wants to look pretty, and she feels like, when she makes an effort, it really makes her focus on how she doesn't feel like she's pretty enough. And I just thought, oh, honey, if you're a woman, that's kind of the way it is, right? Like, women always don't feel pretty enough. It's like our society, she's actually more of a woman in that scene than and ever before, because our society is always making us women not feel pretty enough and not feel that we ever measure up to the beauty standards. So I was just thinking, oh, you made it. You're a woman, because here you are feeling the same way as all the other women feel, which is not pretty enough. And so to me, I felt like it's not really about being a trans woman in your 60s. It's really about being a woman in this society that just makes you always feel like you just are never good enough for, society's view.
Well, and that's such an interesting perspective bringing to them too, because like, I know I mentioned that scene earlier from the lens of, Will Ferrell's like, I'm going to be a regular person for this sequence. And no, he's not. And he has the ability to dress up like a complete clown and be this caricature and be that way. And, people are paying attention because, he's being silly. But all of what Harper's going through in that scene, and it's such a very different dynamic in terms of, like, he's having a ball just trying to look normal, quote unquote, but with, putting on an accent and putting on a wig and a fake mustache and all that stuff. And what Harper's going through in that scene is such a deeper, more emotionally impactful experience. And it's such a important thing to think about. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because to be honest, that's one thing that maybe like I wasn't really thinking about in that scene. But that's really reassuring seeing like that kind of reaction to that scene and being like, yeah, you get it. And you're experiencing that now. And, you know, I hope Harper hears those, having those kinds of reinforcing of like, yes, that's you being able to experience being a woman how you want to be seen and how you feel is really important.
Yeah, and, like, to be a woman, I hope the other thing this movie gives us is that to be a woman, there isn't one way to be a woman, right?
Mhm.
There's lots of different ways to be a
Yes.
woman. You don't have to be, quote, unquote, "super pretty" to be a
Mhm.
woman, you all you have to do is feel like you're a woman, right? And
Mhm.
then you're a woman. So to me, Harper is pretty enough. She's a lovely human being. And of course, we all have our insecurities. We all
Yeah.
want to be prettier. We all want to look more like whatever. We all have our own internal aesthetic that we think we should live up to, right? And I'm older now, so I'm like thinking, oh gosh, I wish I looked younger, right? But we're always made to feel like we're not enough. But I hope that this movie helps all women feel like we can just be the kind of woman that we are, whether we're young or old or cis or
Mhm.
trans or gay or straight or whatever. That we can just be a woman and feel like I'm enough, I'm good enough, and I can be the woman that I want to be and not the woman that someone tells me I should be.
And I think that's really the key to what makes this film so successful and so impactful is that, sure, it is a film about a transition. It is a film about a trans woman experiencing this, but it's about friendship. It's about our insecurities. It's about our body image issues. You
Yeah.
know, I'll get dressed one morning and be like, this shirt doesn't fit quite as much as it used to. And like I've dealt with a lot of weight issues in my life. And, I don't feel great in this outfit anymore, or things like that. And this film is able to hit on those universal themes so deeply and so impactfully that anybody who watches this film, one, it hits on the layer of helping us understand this experience, this transition, but also it hits on themes that we can all relate to and experience in our own lives. And that's what makes a film great, is being able to find ways to connect.
Absolutely. Like there's the swimming pool scene, right, where Will
Mhm.
is wearing like a Speedo or something and they're talking about their bodies and
Yeah.
and Harper so sweetly says, I know that, perhaps your body is not exactly where you'd like it to be right now. You're carrying a little extra weight, but whatever, like it's okay, right? And just the way she does it, she's so sweet about
Mhm.
it. And Will is also just like, here I am, this is my body,
Yeah.
and it's like, and just being vulnerable too. And I think the whole movie, both of them are sort of, they're both being funny and witty,
Yeah.
but they're also both being really brave and really vulnerable.
Mhm.
And it's like kind of the best of humanity, right? What they're representing, just being
Mhm.
honest, being open, being courageous, being vulnerable, and being hysterical. Like, no wonder this film did so well.
Yeah.
It really, to me, shows human beings at their very best.
Absolutely. And especially coming from the actor who really became super famous by streaking in a film like Old School. And, just being able to see that feeling of, yeah, this is my body, look at it. And being able to see this different side and seeing the intimate side. But at the end of the day, I feel like this film is so impactful. And I didn't really know much about who Harper was. Obviously, Harper was writer behind the scenes kind of experience. And I'm happy that I watched this film, and it gives you all kinds of different hope for, how relationships can last over time and how we all go through changes and find our ways to overcome our insecurities and be happy with ourselves and being ourselves. And I'm happy that I got to see Harper's journey throughout this film.
Yeah, and I think it is obviously a journey of gender transition,
Yep.
but we can also see it as symbolic for a lot of different kinds of transitions in our lives, right? How some of our transitions are not chosen, some of our transitions are chosen. Some people become disabled, and that's a
Yeah.
transition. We get older, that's something that just happens. We change careers, we have relationships that change. So there's lots of transitions in our lives. And can our relationships weather these transitions? And this movie is showing that with some compassion and
Mhm.
some open heartedness and some open mindedness, they certainly can.
Absolutely.
Well, Shane Conto, tell us where we can find you so that our listeners can check out your work.
Absolutely. So I have my own website, the wastelandreviewer.blog. Now I do weekly articles and reviews. I have my YouTube channel, the Wasteland Reviewer YouTube channel, which I have 3 weekly shows and have been doing reviews on for 8 years now. So, and I do a bunch of podcasts for the SPM Crew Podcasting Network with a friend of mine. So, a lot of great things to go check out. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it was a pleasure talking about Will and Harper with you today, Shane.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!